identified and placed as a result of their limited English language proficiency. All right? Depending on their level of proficiency, they will be placed with certain units, mandated units of instruction. Again, that triggers beginning kindergarten and beyond. In addition to that, the regulations require students to be placed in an appropriate program setting. So there are essentially two types of programs. Think of them as standalone English as a second language program. And you have to have ESL certification to do that. And that's K to 12. And then you have your bilingual program. The term bilingual program is an umbrella term that covers all types of program configuration, model, and design. It depends on your student population, it depends on your goal, and to be honest, it depends on your resources, both in terms of capital and personnel. So let me talk about the common bilingual program. In our state, we have what we call the two-way bilingual education program. In this program, it's an additive program. It believes that students learn best when they start early. It believes that students learn best when they can interact with both English dominant and non-English dominant students. So the research tells us that you have a 50-50 model. You identify 50% of students who are English dominant, 50% of students who are non-English dominant. You identify that target language you want to use for as a second language. You provide instruction, not necessarily power instruction, but continuing instruction. So you teach math addition in one lesson in English, and you will continue that lesson in second language. That makes sense to you. You could alternate your days. You could alternate, say, morning, afternoon, you switch, or you could switch the days, day one, day two, and so on and so forth. In this model, students are learning English, literacy, and reading in English, and they do the same in the second language. So that's how we can think of it as an additive program. What you see in this program is kids who are in this program from the very beginning, right? The research and what we see across the state is that their literacy, both English and the second language, are incredible. Students are performing, see, I'll look at the English dominant students. Students who are studying, say, Spanish or Chinese for that matter. In New York City, we have a lot of those sort of programs. French is another one. That by the time they hit 6th grade, their target proficiency, their proficiency in, say, the second language, French, for example, exceeds those students who have taken it in 7th, 8th, 9th grade. It is incredible. And the students who are non-English dominant shows a corresponding level of increase in their ELA literacy and development. So we do see that. But I'll come to the politics in a second. So that's one program design. There's something called transitional bilingual program or bilingual transition program. That's how you do it. And this again is an extension of political discussion. Think of it this way. I'm sure you must have heard in another state this English-only movement. So our goal is to make you transition out of your native language as fast as we can, move you into mainstream classroom. And even the mainstream classroom, the term mainstream is problematic for us. It really is problematic. Think of it this way. You're telling me that the kids are not bringing skills to the table. I'm sure a lot of our students can do math. Forgive me for saying, much better than many of our native-born students. And so it's not that they can't do the math, they just can't tell you how they do the math. You just show them math problem, they probably can show how to do it. But be that as it may. We should edit that piece out, okay? So the point of this program is that while they are learning content in their native language, they are beginning to have more and more English language input and transitioning out into the mainstream classroom. The problem with that approach is, while it is good in principle, is when do you draw the line? And we have teachers who are very protective of such students who will never let them go. And on the flip side, we have administrators who are like, get them out as soon as possible. Because it is, to be honest, it takes a toll on resources. All right? It really does. That's not putting into what is in the best interest of the student. It takes a toll on resources. There are other programs, and I'm giving you the highlights, and the other extreme is what they call English immersion program. And you will see that in a lot of non-public schools, and you'll see that in a lot of private schools. It's like I don't have an ESL teacher. I have never dealt with a student from China before. Guess what? Miss Smith, good luck. And that's where we have English immersion. I'm being flippant about it. There are some parameters, I know that. But essentially, that's what we're saying here to you is, you know what? We believe that it is best for you, student and parent, to know that your child is being introduced to English from the very beginning, and this is where we are. What we see from research is that while it is true, if the kids were to come in at very early ages, think in your group, pre-K and kindergarten, they will be fine. We have seen that. Anecdotally, I'm sure you have seen kids like that. But what is problematic is when they come into you in grade 7, 8, 9. Holy cow! You are asking them to do social studies and what? And in what language? That's the problem. You see? And then New York State is very clear about this. It doesn't matter what your language background is. We expect you to meet all these graduation requirements. We expect you to be college and career ready. You see the conundrum that we are in right now in terms of program design. Yes, ma'am.
I have to ask, who makes that policy?
Local decisions.
So it's the school boards who are in charge, but there's no state state ed governing.
Thank you for asking that question. So, Part 154 has only one mandate that addresses that. If you have a group of students, 20, New York City aside, New York City is operating under a court order for a different reason. It's called the Espira Decree. New York City aside, the number is different. For the rest of state who are not under court supervision, I'll be very clear. If you're not under court supervision, you have to abide by 154, which says, if you have a group of students, incoming students, 20 or more students, from the same grade level, from the same language background, and from the same building, you're required, district, to provide a bilingual education program. But it doesn't say what type of program. It simply says a bilingual education program. That is the only requirement. But like I said, you know, if you don't have that, and I'm, you know, since we, and again, you can edit this out, there are districts out there who are very strategic in how they place their students. I'll be very honest. So if this disbursement path works, and there's no pushback from the community, you will never trigger that. But if most districts, however, I want to say, be honest, most districts are very, very good about it. They really try. And again, you know, from the pragmatic side, it does take a toll on your resources. But that's a requirement. A lot of districts are doing just that. They provide this bilingual education. And depending on how they define it, it is, think of it this way, it is not a deficit model. What it promotes is this. We know the kids are bringing funds of knowledge. You know the term funds of knowledge? They're bringing stuff with them. They're bringing prior knowledge. They're bringing background. They're bringing cultural information that would really enrich their learning experiences. This is why the bilingual program acknowledges that you do not come to us with a blank slate. We build on what you have, if that makes sense. So this has tremendous implication, not so much from a policy perspective, but from a programmatic perspective for you folks at your level, since we don't go that far down. So we'll talk a little bit about that using your standards later on. So that, to answer your question, that is the only mandate that we have. So that's the bilingual side of things. On the ESL side of things, if you choose not to, or if the numbers do not trigger a bilingual requirement, then all you need to do is to provide ESL programs. Now, ESL program is also in a state of flux right now. I am sure many of you have had experience. You know, there are many teachers out of experience teaching ESL to adults, for example, adult literacy program. And you will know that if, especially if you are not a trained ESL teacher, most of us, and even the trained ones, back in this, when I was going through ESL training, you know, you talk a lot about what is your name, what you like to eat, what is your favorite color, let's talk about the flag. That's all. The colors, the shapes, and all that. And then we'll talk about your family, you know, the topics that you associate with, you guys associate with foreign language classroom, right? But you know what the problem is? That's what Jim Cummins, a very famous researcher, called basic interpersonal proficiency skills. They have nothing to do with academic language proficiency. Nothing. So we have, as a field, moved away from that kind of social interaction. It's important. Trust me, it is really important. If you, let me put that aside. It is important, but what we are focusing on right now is to assist the kids to achieve academically. And how do we do that? And that's a more important issue right now. That's one state of transition. The second state of transition that I see right now is the Common Core learning standards. It is pushing all content areas, including ESL, to the brink right now. It's like, what are you asking me to do? Reading? You're teaching me academic vocabulary. You're asking me to do teaching content-based instruction. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And then the third thing that we're struggling with right now are the standards. Because of the requirements of the Common Core, we have to respond, and we are in process of developing something called the bilingual Common Core progressions. They are not standards per se, but these are, think of them as manifestation, what students can do at the end of their grade level instruction with the language that they have. That makes sense. And then you have another thing that's going on is the tests, the assessments right now. So that is bringing another layer of complexity to what ESL teachers do. Fair enough. So ESL teachers are certified K to 12. And a lot of times, if you're in a smaller school district and you're a teacher of one, so Ms. Davis, for example, you're one ESL teacher in a school of 435 kids, for example. What do you think happens to your schedule? You go from K to 12. And what do you think you can do? Use pull out, right?
Yeah.
So there are essentially two types of model, pull out or push in. So pulling out, it's a great idea because you're providing targeted interventions. And I would be very careful when I say the word intervention. It is really not intervention in the way we think of it. We are essentially supporting their language development and acquisition as ESL teachers. We are using, pulling in content from math, science, social studies, ELA. And we are pulling in, and this is what you have to be very clear, we are not the ELA learning standards, the Common Core ELA standards, but we are aligned to the ELA learning standards, Common Core learning standards. That makes sense. So that makes our job really difficult. Pulling out is good, but what happens to the flip side in terms of student schedule?
They miss something that's
Yeah,
happening.
exactly. They miss content. So this is the conflict that we're facing right now. Districts are finding it very difficult to respond to that. They know that the kid cannot miss math. They know they cannot miss social studies and science and ELA and so on and so forth. And yet we have these mandate minutes of instruction. You tell me what to do. So they will say to you, let's take out music, let's take out arts, let's take out all the PE, let's take out lunch.
Yeah, she got lunch.
I'm not kidding, it does happen, but you see where they are. It's not the best solution, but they are thinking. So our job is to help them think outside the box. So pulling out, in Ms. Davis' case, as a single teacher in a K-12 setting, it's impossible, but that's what they have to struggle with. In a better setting, you will see, say, a bigger district with 4 or 5 teachers at different levels. So this is where they pull out with a standalone period, grades, middle schools and higher. In the elementary school, they pull out during the blocks. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right? So you say, Ken, you talk about mandated minutes. What does that really mean? It really is not, from my perspective, you can look at, it's really not important. What you need to understand is, it has to do with proportionality. If you offer 20 minutes of reading block, you have to offer 20 minutes of ESL. But in the K-7 to 8 setting, it's 180 minutes, at least 180 minutes of classroom instruction per week, or the equivalent for the whole school year. That's in the commission's regulation. That makes sense, if this is a period. So in your case, think of, in the kindergarten block, it will be, think of it as blocks. If you have ELA block of half an hour, you will see the equivalent in that. That makes sense, right? So the other model that you see is push-in model, and we are seeing a lot of changes in that area too. In the old days, a push-in is like a glorified babysitter or a teaching assistant. Really, I'm being honest, I did that myself. Because we don't have the option to collaborate with the social studies teacher, for example. I don't have a chance to talk to you, Ms. Davis. I just show up, hey, here I am, what are you doing today? Great. So you pull out your worksheet and I sit with the kid and I help the kid with the worksheet. It is fine at a very, very basic level, but it doesn't do very much in terms of promoting, a high level language acquisition and development. So what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of push, in New York City especially, for co-teaching model. All right, so you see that. Even in a co-teaching model, we see a lot of changes. It's no longer like, you know what, you just stand there and I will teach, I, social studies teacher, will teach, and then you come in and help. No, it is like you co-plan and you teach together, especially ELA. We see a lot of that right now going on. So that is the most ideal thing to do because you're supporting content through scaffolded instruction. And that term is very important, scaffolded instruction. Does that make sense? So I talked a little bit about our regulations. I talked a little about program design. And right now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the funding piece of it so that you can understand where we are coming from. Title III funding is triggered by student counts, all right? And there are two sets of counts. There's the students who are considered limited English proficient. The local districts would count those students based on their testing and placement, right? Originally I told you, once they've been placed, you assign them a unique student ID, you count those kids. In parallel to that process, the non-public school in that jurisdiction will also count their students and send out that data to vets. Somewhere along the line, those two sets of data will merge at the Western RIC where we have a contract, and that data will come back to the public school to verify, and then that goes back to the Western RIC, and then goes back to the state where we assign an allocation based on per pupil numbers. That makes sense. But those allocations do not count kids who are in pre-kindergarten and younger, unfortunately. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. Then we have the immigrant count, which is something else altogether. So here there is a self-reporting survey that they have to do. The public school will ask the non-public school as part of Title III requirements to consult with them, and they will add the number up, send it back to the state, and we will do another set of allocation. There are two sets of numbers there. Immigrant is based on substantial increase. So if there are no substantial increase, the numbers will not be triggered at all. That's a basic formula there. So what happens to your population? So that's essentially is where we are right now with the two sets of programs I'm talking about. So I'm taking a break right now. So do you have any questions up to this point? I know there's a lot of information for you. I hope it makes sense. And
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you say non-public school, you're talking parochial schools and private?
yes, all registered non-public schools.
And does any of the money come back to them?
No, that's a great question. No. Unlike Title I, Title III's money will always stay with the public school. The public school responsibility is to provide what they call, quote unquote, in-kind services that are comparable but not necessarily similar. You have to remember that. I, public school, am not required to send you an ESL teacher. But I am required to initiate a consultation with you, and you and I will collaborate and think through what your needs are. So let's say you have student needs. You say, you know what, we just simply don't have any capacity to student identify. Some district will say, fine, we'll do that for you.
Okay.
Other district will say to you, nope, we can't do that. We will help you, train you to do this for yourself.
Okay.
Other districts are really kind. Rochester is very, very kind. Rochester will send one of their ESL teachers to help with the non-public school. But please do not think of this as standard practice. It's not always the case. So they'll say to you, you know what, bring your students up to us for after-school activities, after-school tutoring, after-school sessions. We can help you with that. Or send your teachers up for PD. We will do that for you. You need dictionaries? Great, we'll buy you some dictionary with your Title III funds. This is a very, quote-unquote, mysterious process for non-public schools because they actually don't see the money. And it really, really depends on that consultation process, how much money they are entitled to. And I'll be very, very honest with you. You know, this money is not always accurate. Services are never equal in that sense, if you know what I mean. Some districts are doing a lot more, other districts are doing somewhat less. If that makes sense.
Now, is there any future consideration, since many public schools currently have pre-kindergarten processes, and screening is part of the first 45 days requirements there, is there any consideration being made to make resources available for screening and assessing those children?
I can
English
honestly
language
say,
learners?
at least from the state side of funding, I don't think that will be possible. But NCLB is, you know, you guys have read the news in New York Times and all that. You know, we have been talking about renewing NCLB for the longest time. If all the stars are aligned and that should happen, it is entirely possible because of Obama's initiative on pre-K and so on and so forth. But it has to come from that level to signal to us. Remember, most state regulation reflects federal requirements. That makes sense?
Yeah.
That's what we do.
I mean, I think we all understand that pre-kindergarten is not a mandate,
Yeah.
and it's not a requirement
Yeah.
for children to attend, so we understand, you know, the politics or the social politics of this country, which, you
Yeah.
know, doesn't support
Yeah.
non-mandated programs.
Absolutely.
We understand that, it's just we want more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Part of the
yes.
issue, Mary, was about 10 years ago, they actually did require some
Yeah.
screening and some support for ELL in the preschool age. But they were finding that the assessments that they used
Very.
to determine if they really needed this support were not very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of undid the whole.
Yeah. I think that if they were to do that now, we have developed sophistication in the field to understand what the mistakes were that were made back then, and we could redo it
I
the
think
right
so
way.
too, but I think it's what Kim refers to as, when it comes from the national level, then everybody will stand up and
Yeah.
pay attention.
We can talk a little bit about this under learning environment in the second half of in our discussion. That would be great.
What happens in schools or school districts where there are a multitude of foreign languages? I mean, I am thinking about Queens, when I worked with some college stars programs in Queens, and they would have 20 different languages, including 5 different dialects.
Can I ask you a
from India.
question? Does anybody know this answer? How many languages are spoken in New York State?
420, something like that. Even more, I mean.
It's, that's, last year we counted 324.
Oh.
In New York City alone, all right, there's about 127.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's a very interesting, you know, and we are not the highest number. Go California, it's even worse than us, but not worse, it's even better than us.
It's more
Yes.
diverse.
Better than us. Yeah, edit that part out, that was my office was telling me that part. So the answer is a very difficult answer, it is true. So this actually brings us to what I want to talk about in learning environment. I haven't had any discussion with Amy or Lynette or Meg about, you know, how to screen and identify students in their language. Like Lynette alluded to, it is a very difficult process. And it is not simply about you, you know, having had some experience. It is about your experience with bilingualism, including your ability and proficiency in the child's native language. It is about your experience working with bilingual, bicultural families and so on. And that is not something that, you know, that all of us come to this with. Even I don't have that all experience working with all these kids, you know, with that. So what you need to understand is there are limitations to that. In our screening process, it requires to administer, all students are required, I don't know about pre-K, but in K onwards, all right, all incoming students are required to be given what they call the home language questionnaire. All right, home language survey, home language questionnaire, they call it survey in New York City, I believe. And that's triggered by chapter 117 of the Commission for Regulations, 115 or 117 plus 154 there. And what it does is it asks you literally, do you speak a language other than English at home? When you say yes, and you indicate, say, Chinese, in my case, for example, it triggers the second level of screening. Someone who is trained will give you the child an informal interview in English and the child's native language. Now that is not always possible. We have a lot of students coming in from Somali, for example, Korean speaking coming from Burma, for example, Myanmar, for example. We simply don't have the kind of capacity for those languages. So we always say, and I'm sure Lynette and Amy will latch up on this, and we always say, if you act with faith and with some fidelity, and to the extent practicable, you may be able to bypass the Somali test and just use English only. But you see the limitation in that?
Those are our practices too.
Yeah, you see the limitation in that. It is very limited in that sense. And at that point, the third thing is you administer what they call the LAB-R, Language Assessment Battery Device. And that test will be changed to be called the NYSITEL, New York State Identification Test for English Language Learning, NYSITELL. So So Lab R will go to NICETEL next year, in
Wow.
2014.
Yeah.
So the test will determine your level of proficiency, and based on that cut score, whatever score you have, you will be placed in the continuum of mandated units of instruction. And this is where the learning environment kicks in. It is really, really difficult for ESL teachers to teach when you don't understand the kids' language. I'll give you an example. How many of you speak Spanish here? You do. Bob, I know what I'm talking about. There are lots of cognates with Spanish and English. And if you're not sensitive to that, you are missing a big part of a child's education, even in early childhood. And especially at your level, you deal with a lot of oral C, right? You work with that all the time. If you don't understand that, and you don't see that, and you don't bring that resource to the front of your instructional approach, you are missing this whole chunk here. But the inverse is also true. If you don't speak Chinese or Arabic or Russian or Polish, all right, you may inevitably create blocks in the kids' literacy development that you don't see before. So it's really critical when we talk about screening identification, all right? That's part of your learning environment. So when you do screen, it is critical for you to understand that, especially if your service provider doesn't understand that language. What other strategies can you use to help identify the kid? Now, there are kids out there who, from some cultural background, will tell you, their parents will tell us, you know what? In our culture, African cultures, Asian cultures, we are so shy, they won't say anything to you. What does that mean then? Does that mean they're limited English proficient? All right? So, if it's very important to, when I begin a discussion names, when you see the kid's name coming to you, it might be productive for you to initiate an outreach to those parents. If they can't engage you in conversation, there's no money for an interpreter, engage the community or church advocate for that family. Because that's the way to initiate the discussion, where they're coming from, what you can learn from them, especially if they have very traumatic backgrounds, so you don't know about that. All right, a lot of kids are coming to us from war-torn situations with, just horrific situations that we can't even begin to imagine. But that is really critical to your screening identification process. And then it's really interesting once you can gather all that data and you realize that, yes, the kid may need some additional support. Does that mean that the child is limited English proficient? And what does it really mean anyway for your level of instruction? That's another interesting to think about. And what resources can you bring to bear to help you screen and identify the kids? So that's one piece of it. And once they're in the classroom, when you think of instruction again, think about what they bring to the table, as opposed to looking at them, oh my God, they don't know the ABCs, let's start with that. You'll be surprised to know that some of these kids who come from Romance-based languages, that they actually do know some alphabet. They just sound out differently than you do, that's all. So if that's true, then we don't want interference. We just want to give them, look, you can do this. Look at what else we can do with this letter, J, for example, or Y, for example. Am I correct, Bob? I'm not Spanish speaking, so I know I only can refer to people who can speak Spanish. In Chinese, for example, you know that we don't have the kind of letters that you have. So Japanese, Korean, for example, they have other ways, and then the kids use those characters to do what? Phoneticize English. Lynette is nodding her head.
Well, only because I have two adopted Korean children.
Yeah, they will take the characters and literally put it on top of your English word, and they will say to you things like, this is McDonald's. McDonald's is a restaurant. So the kids will say to you, yes, Makudo Naruto. See the difference? It's not that they don't know your word, they're just sounding out differently than you would, because they're phoneticizing their English, using their understanding of language. It's really cute sometimes when they do that. But I mean, be that simple. So the learning environment, it's, from my perspective, and I think, I think, from a lot of research, what we see is that you need to determine in your baseline data collection, collect as much information as you can. And you, as a team, you need to decide what sort of data can you reasonably collect, given the resources that you have. And what will be most critical and most useful to you as you begin that process for instruction, for placement, and so on and so forth. So that's where we are. I'm going to stop right here for a little bit. Learning environment, do you have any specific question?
Our standards are integrated.
Yeah.
So I think we actually, some of what we are doing as coaches are actually helping programs to develop the system so that they can capture some of this
Yeah.
information. So on and our standards speak to this. In the family engagement, our second language
Yeah.
standard is
Yeah.
about inviting parents in
Absolutely.
their language, but also in the intake process is asking them those questions.
Yeah.
What culture are you coming from? What is the home language?
Yes.
Not necessarily that we are able to provide the supports, the
Yes.
bilingual supports. But one of the things that I do see different is that our standards speak to empowering families to make decisions
Yes,
about.
I will come to that in a second.
Okay.
But I just want to focus on the instructional piece. If you have any issues that you have encountered that you,
Oh, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Is sometimes the families say to us, I want you to speak only English to my child.
yes.
And so then we need to use our expertise and
Yes,
bring
and
it back to
sensitivity
something
to that.
else.
I will tell you, in my experience with the office, right, a lot of Asian families really insist on that. They do believe that, you know what, we do Chinese at home, don't worry about that, we'll take care of that. This is what I can tell you. If the literacy, if the home environment is language rich, you're nodding, you know what I'm talking about. If the environment is very strong, it's very, very, think about parents who are able to send them on trips, you know, go to zoo, they go to music events, they talk a lot, they read a lot. Fine, no problem with
It's
that.
not.
But if it's not true, then it really is a little difficult, but it's not impossible. These kids, like I said, when they come to you early enough, all right, it's fine. They will get it. They will be much, you know, this whole thing about English-only environment, it's fine. All you need to do is just recognize that there might be some linguistic differences or similarities that you should know about. So there's stuff out there called culturegrams and there are resources out there that will give you some snapshots about the language, the features of that language that you could look up, whether it's an SVO language or SOV language, subject, verb, object, verb, language like Japanese is. So things like that, you can just read up and say, oh my God, I didn't know Japanese is SOV. So is Korean for that matter. The verb ends at the end. That's why the kid is like going this way. And then in our vernacular, for example, in popular culture, for example, the to be verbs, for example, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's the same idea. We just need to be aware. Not that it's wrong, but it's just that, you know what, I'm signaling to you that, you know, in English, this is how we do it, this is how we do it in a different language. So that's all you need to do, be able to raise awareness, that they can talk about those differences using English perhaps. Oh my God, you know, when I say I love you, you know, I'm actually saying you love, you know?
Well, not today, I'm not gonna put you on
Yeah.
the spot. Can you send us some resources? Because those are the resources we like to pass on to our
Oh, sure,
participants.
yeah, that we
The
can do,
people
yeah,
in the
yeah.
field actually doing this to
Yeah.
help them understand a little bit more
Yeah.
how to
Yes,
approach this
yes.
appropriately.
Absolutely. So to go back to the point, if they are language rich at home, fine. We just support them. But if they are not, and you're fully aware they are not, then you need to be aware, some awareness behind your instruction as to what this kid actually needs, and then provide lots of language input, scaffolded input with lots of visuals, manipulatives, things that they can put their hands on, they can see, they can, visualize, things that would help them, at concreteness, and the developmental stage at the time. Lots of that stuff. I think that would be very good. Repetition. You'll be surprised. I know all the kids love repetition. ESL kids really benefit from repetition. I'm not talking about repetition drills. I'm talking about content repetition. I'm talking about sentence use in different contexts. I'm talking about things like, sequential talking, like first we do this, second we do this, third we do this. Apply that pattern in another context. That's the kind of stuff, scaffold instruction, that we really need there. And there's a line of research called cultural thinking, and that's my term, right? Where they think that Asians think like this, and the Western culture you think like this, and we don't get to the point. Some of it has been debunked. It's just the way you are culturated, not because you are programmed to think like that. It's just something that kids can reframe their thinking in certain ways to make, when we write exposition, for example, when we make arguments, for example, that sort of thing you can talk about. I'm sorry, Molly.
No, I need to talk, but I'm smiling because in my particular
Yes.
school district where I live, we have a lot of Japanese families whose a parent comes, they come for a couple of years, and so that they're not living in the States for long periods of time.
Yes.
But the
Are you
family,
in the Westchester County area?
Port Washington,
Well, Washington. You're near Harrison, aren't you?
what?
Are you near Harrison Central School District?
No, I'm not,
Long
I'm in
Island.
Nassau County,
Long Island.
Port Washington.
Okay.
So, these families, their children are not in ESL, they're not English language, they are,
Are they in public school?
yes,
Okay. That is not consistent with requirements of the law.
but they don't need, it doesn't matter. They, what I'm saying is these children manage, they acclimate,
I understand that.
just what you said.
But-
No, I'm not saying that they should be, but we also have a very large immigrant
Yeah.
Spanish population,
Yes.
mostly from Central America,
Yeah.
and other immigrant populations are now moving in.
Yes.
And there is not a strong verbal, that many of the families did experience trauma at one time, certainly 10, 15 years ago, and many of the parents are not educated themselves.
Yes.
These are the children who have been
Yeah.
designated as
Yeah.
English language learners.
Now, there's one part that I could say about is advocacy. You know your kids are transitioning from your program to kindergarten. And one thing that you can do is to advocate for them in terms of the services for which they're entitled to. And I'll be very clear, right? This one, if a student comes to you, right, and there are lots of parents who would do this, they will put on the form English only, all right, spoken at home. So we don't have any legal alternative but to put the kids in a mainstream classroom. And when the kids does need services, all right, you could, in principle, put this kid in an ESL classroom, but minus the accountability piece of it, minus the funding piece of it. Am I making sense? You can certainly give them the service, just like AIS, after-school tutoring, that sort of thing. You can give them, but they're just not formally in the program for accountability purposes. They're not formally in the program for funding purposes. That's one thing. Second thing is, one of the things you have to be very careful is if you selectively choose, so you think that all Chinese are so good, they don't need ESL services, you, administrator, unilaterally say, you know what, I'll just exit them without even testing them. One of the things you have to be very careful of is just your legal standing. You have no legal standing. If the kid comes back in 6th grade and challenges you and say, you know what, I came in and I was an L, and I know I was an L because I didn't speak a word of English, and you didn't give me all the service which you're entitled to, your district will be sued to the yin yang. And that's a technical term, I think. You will lose. You will definitely lose in that lawsuit of the yin yang. You will lose. All right, so be very careful. I know parents are very resistant. There are parents out there who tell you, I simply don't want ESL. And there are some really bad programs out there. I'll be the first one to admit it. And that's why they don't want to be there. And they don't want to be taken on math, they don't want to take out science, they don't want to be taken on ELA for ESL. And that's why ESL teachers must do a better job aligning their program course expectation with the content. And they need to understand that taking kids out of content is not an appropriate strategy to help them.
I can't help see the parallels with special education.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And it's almost like they develop these regulations, because here's another population that, they see as a special need.
That is correct.
And then we never
Yes.
meet their needs.
That.
Right.
So you see, who is this? Karen? Just remember what I said. The way Karen frames it, it's a deficit model.
Right.
You
Right.
see, can you
But
hear
this
that?
is wrong,
Not that
this is
Karen
bad.
is doing it, but the way we talk about those students, all right, it's like they are missing something up here somewhere.
Right.
When in fact, we should invert that model and say, you know what, they are so much better than the rest of us because they're bringing so much more to the table. The question is, how do we access and display that for everyone to see?
Or just,
Well, in our standards, in the transition standard, do we address that advocacy issue, engaging families in ways so that they can continue the bilingual practices or the English language supports we help programs instilled in early childhood up to.
Well, I mean, we talk about transitioning, helping families transition from pre-K to kindergarten, and so providing information about, kindergarten registration and what's available to you. We don't talk specifically about continuing services that are beyond pre-K, but I think that's a logical connection.
That's funny. I want to stop right there because that's a good point. That piece that Ola just described may be funded with Title III. So when you're trying to explain the transition to kindergarten, get it, it's kindergarten I'm interested in.
Right.
That piece may be funded through the district with Title III funding or other funding sources. And for that purpose, you can use interpreters, translators, translated documents. You may bring in consultants. You can do a lot of those things with Title III funding.
Okay, that's
Okay.
good for us to know.
I had been the former director of pre-K with Syracuse City
Oh,
School
good,
District.
good,
We
yeah.
had an early reading first grant, 2007 to
Yes.
10, with a focus on
Yes.
English
Yes.
language learners.
Yes.
And that One Child, Two Languages is
Yes.
a really good book
Yes.
for early childhood
Yes.
resources. But we worked on
Yes.
looking at a child's
Yes.
acquisition level,
Yes.
that silent stage to then really communicating.
Yes.
And then what are good developmentally appropriate
Good.
practices in each
That's
of those
that's really good.
stages?
Yeah. And it's funny when she uses those terms, right? Like a silent stage, for example. It applies to all our kids, doesn't it?
It does.
It really does.
Every
Yes.
3
The question is, they are not silent because they want to be silent. Maybe they are silent because they can't say anything.
Taking it all
Yeah.
in.
If they could just yell in Spanish or
Right.
Chinese, maybe they would do it. I don't know.
It's one child, two worlds.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there is
Yeah.
One Child, Two Languages.
There is two? Okay.
Now, family involvement and support is something that Title III really promotes. And that's why I said in that example, very specific example, that Title III funding may be used for in the kindergarten context. So family involvement and support is something that we talk about in all the legal documents. And what does that really mean for us anyway? All of you have done this family transition sort of program, correct? Introduce them to school and everything. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funding for you to provide an interpreter or translated document. However, that doesn't mean that your district in the continuum of K to 12 program can't do that for you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, they can do it, but you can't do it. You can access the fund, but they can do it if they choose to. Because what you're translating are not instructional stuff.
So it's arbitrary
No.
if they choose to?
No. Yeah, that is true. A lot of it is at their discretion, and what the lawyers say, what the accountants say, what the business managers say, and what their priorities are, to be honest. What I can tell you is we cannot fund your program. I cannot fund your teacher. I cannot fund your materials. I cannot fund your after-school programs. I cannot fund that. But any activities that are related or connected to their transition to kindergarten, we can look into that. Again, it is at the district's discretion whether they want to do it or not. All right? So in terms of family engagement, let me go back to one thing. A lot of times, these parents, like most of American parents, are really afraid of schools. They really look at you as the ultimate authority on things. They really do. And they defer to you in all situations. It is very rare do we see a very strong parent coming to you and complaining about everything under the sun. It is very rare, but it does happen. But most of them do defer to you because you are the experts. And we as parents, we don't know anything. And that's sometimes we try to change that mindset, is that how can we tell you that you know a lot about your child and how best to help your child, and what is it that he or she brings to the table, if that making sense. So I can't be concrete because we just don't have funding attached to this activity for you. But it's important for you to initiate contact with the parent, with someone who speaks that language if possible, and the free ones are from the community, from the church that sponsored that individual, or if they came in by themselves, there must be a church nearby that supports that community. All right, so the things that you can reach out to, community-based organization, advocacy organizations, there are lots of them out there, especially where you are in terms of Rochester City, we have a few of those. The Hudson region, we have quite a few of those, and New York City, obviously, it's very strong advocates out there. S- I'm gonna stop right here because, I don't know enough about your program to tell you what you can or cannot do. Ask me questions about family engagement and then we will form a discussion there.
I think the hard part that is these standards when we're going and talking to different providers, I think is a very intimidating one for them because it is like Marlene said, we're not just talking about Spanish, we're talking about Farsi, we're talking about so many
Yeah.
different languages that I think it's intimidating when you have families like that come into your program and you want to do the best services for them and for the parents.
Yes.
But you have that language barrier. And we want to be able to provide training to our teachers on how to really adequately,
Yes.
integrate the whole services and make everything
Yes.
the way it should be.
Yeah.
But to be able to provide that to our teachers, to our directors in whatever regions, I think, for me, that's where I struggle with, is these people want the help. They want to have somebody come out to them and say, where can I go? What can I do? How can we instill
Yeah.
that? But there's not a lot of training
I
opportunities.
think it might
out there.
behoove this team to come up with very concrete, not steps. I want to focus on the what piece of it. At what level do you think it's critical to have family involvement? I think that would begin that discussion. Let's say enrollment piece. Then you will find one set of resources to help you with that. If you talk about instruction, another type of family engagement. If you're talking about health issues, another set of engagement. I think it might be better for you to define for yourself where are the areas that you absolutely need families' help in providing services to your child. I think in the abstract, it's really difficult to talk about. Just for everything, you need everything. But if you formalize those specific areas, it might make it easier for us from our side to help you with resources. That make sense? So one piece you can think about is, so I want to teach the kid, I'm going to provide reading activities, all right? What can we do to help kids read better, to develop reading, foundational skills for reading? Amy worked a lot on that one, all right? And then how do we scaffold instruction to make sure that they can, in terms of their acquisition and in terms of their output, what can we do? So if you narrow that for us, we can help you. But if you're asking us the entire spectrum of services, it's very difficult for us to focus on that. There's an organization, we have a statewide technical assistance center called the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network, RBERN. There are 8 of them, there are 7 of them, there are 7 regional bilingual education resource network, and there is 1 statewide language resource network. And I'll send either Lynette or Amy or Mag those information. You can certainly call them, and I'm sure they can help you with that. I think one of the one category of students that you will not encounter is students with interrupted formal education. You will never encounter that because you start so early. So they could not have been interrupted at this point. But what you will
It's about
encounter,
beginning them. It's about beginning them, really, for us. It's about them being able to participate in.
That's correct. So they are coming to you with perhaps likely with no formal education up to that point, most of them.
I work with one center, they have a large population of Korean families and more from the Syracuse University
Yeah.
connection, but she had found a volunteer that would translate her parent handbook
Yes.
into the
Yes.
family's native language. Of course, she says, I don't know if it's saying what my handbook says, but I'm trusting
Yes.
it does.
Karen,
But
thank you.
those types of supports, I
That
think, for
example is
families.
very critical. So you are faced with, this is double-edged sword. You want that document translated, but you, Karen, can't tell whether it's accurate or not.
Exactly.
All right? So you're filtering to somebody else who may not even be a native speaker or was born and raised in this country. So there is the
Right, the
cultural
proficiency.
and there is institutional knowledge. Most parents that you ask who can translate this for you, they are not familiar enough with schools and policies and regulations. So they are doing the best they can. So you need to understand that. And